So my name is Joyce Slate, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Human Nutritional Sciences in the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences here at the University of Manitoba. And I do research and teaching in the area of community and public health nutrition.
Well, I guess we could start off with a question around when you're preparing to teach, what do you enjoy the most about that process?
What do I enjoy about preparing for teaching? I guess I enjoy anticipating what my time in the classroom is going to be like with students, and anticipating how, I really like them to be engaged with the teaching and learning process. And I think part of that is facilitated by having a really good syllabus and set of expectations for students, and that helps guide me.
What are some of the hurdles that you've encountered when preparing to teach a course, or framing the course, structuring the course?
Hurdles. Well, time is always an issue, and I think every professor would say that they don't have enough time to prepare. But some of the hurdles are having really large classes. Class sizes have increased, and that limits some of the more small group or getting to know your students a little bit more on a personal basis. So I find those to be some hurdles. Another hurdle would be, in the area I teach, there's just so much material to draw upon. I mean, I could design almost a completely different course every year. So, what's in and what's out, and making sure it's current. So just being attentive to that.
So how do you go about overcoming those hurdles? So, for instance, the first one you mentioned, very common, time constraints when designing a course. How do you fit all that in? You've got your research demands, you've got committee meetings, things like this.
Just making it a priority and planning ahead so that, several months before, you're actually starting to teach, putting the prerequisites in place. One thing I do, for example, is I have a custom reading package that the bookstore puts together, and they have a deadline, and I have to make sure I meet that every year, which is several months ahead of when the course starts. So that, of course, is connected to my syllabus, and it sort of forces me to get those things in place, and just planning and making time for it.
Right. And another increasingly common feature of the university are these much larger classes. How do you so you want to design a course that is engaging, but it becomes, when we're thinking about small group discussions, that becomes more challenging with these larger lecture hall classes.
So a couple things. One is definitely not unique to me. I know a lot of my colleagues have group assignments for their students, and my experience is students like them and they hate them.
Yeah, one or the other.
So of course we rationalize it that, when you get out into the workforce, you're going to be doing a lot of collaborative work and whatnot. But encouraging students to use technology, setting up really clear parameters of what's expected by group members and as outcomes for the group, making myself available, occasionally giving them time in class to meet together, because sometimes they don't meet face-to-face, it's all done virtually. So yeah, trying to put those things in place really helps facilitate that.
So when you're preparing to teach, how do you use your learning outcomes, your goals, your objectives? How do you use that to focus your teaching?
I use learning outcomes and goals as a roadmap for me and for the students. I think it's really important that students come in knowing what is expected of them in the class. So there's definitely the learning outcomes, but there's also the other expectations in terms of, how they're to prepare assignments, how they're, to interact within the class, if they're supposed to come to class. So, but the learning outcomes and goals are critical for designing the course setting up the evaluation structure so that everything dovetails back into those goals and objectives. And the goals and objectives aren't just about you're going to learn this by the time you leave my class. You know, you're going to know X, Y, and Z. My learning outcomes also include some learning processes. So I have something that I call a Socratic seminar method that I use in my classes. So those, first of all, help my students actually read the material they're supposed to read because it's connected to evaluation. But then they get together in small groups throughout the course to actually discuss the readings together. And it's not just I'll read these 2 articles and come and discuss them. There's a whole framework that they have to follow. They have to develop questions that they ask each other. The questions have to be literal, interpretive, or evaluative. And it really puts some of the learning and teaching into their sphere. I've set up the framework for them to have those critical discussions. So in my courses, one of the learning outcomes is that they will understand how to have critical inquiry into material and how to lead and facilitate a critical discussion. So that's sort of a generic outcome that is independent of the actual course material. And I find that works really well.
Yeah, sounds quite engaging. So, I mean, you've already addressed this next question now. I was going to ask you about higher level thinking. So how, I mean, you touched on a lot of the ways that you can incorporate that in when you have your outcomes in mind. Instead of just those low level content, this means that. Is there anything more that you'd like to say on how you weave higher level thinking into your design?
Okay, so I try to weave higher level thinking in by, first of all, one thing in my courses I find is really important is to have students engage in the world outside the classroom. Now I can't take them out there and physically bring them to places, but I can bring in speakers from agencies and organizations that are working in the area that we're interested in, public health nutrition, community nutrition. But also we have something I call show and tell, which is where I really encourage students to bring in items from the media and pieces that they might see. I mean, nowadays they're not necessarily opening the Free Press every morning, but they're on Twitter and different social media platforms. And I encourage them to bring in pieces that then we can discuss. I'll post those on Learn. So that's one piece, and we connect those back to what we're learning. But I also have an assignment that in my one course in particular, we have the opportunity to have the opinion editor. Sorry, I'm going to start this again. One of the ways I really try to encourage my students to think critically and reflectively about our work and our material is by having them write an op-ed piece, which is really unusual for my 4th year students. They've never had the opportunity to do that kind of an assignment before, and it makes them nervous. But I bring in the perspectives and politics editor from the Winnipeg Free Press. And she comes in, her name is Dr. Shannon Sampert, and she's also a professor at the University of Winnipeg, so it really is this great opportunity to have her come in. And she takes us through the whole reason why op-ed pieces are really important and how to structure getting your voice out there. So it takes the students from, just doing an assignment for me to the idea that they have a voice and the power and authority to go and have influence in the community at large. So every year we try and get some of the students to publish theirs in, not necessarily the Free Press, although that did happen one year, but, in professional newsletters that are relevant to our field. And I think the students really learn a lot from it.
Wow, that's very impressive. So, you've talked a little bit about assessment already. Is there anything more that you'd like to mention in way of advice for new faculty about how having a clear outcome connects with assessment?
I think ensuring that your outcomes and assessment are connected is something that's really critical. And, taking the time to reflect on your own course, your syllabus, your evaluations, and even going to the Center for Academic Learning and Teaching and kind of workshopping your course with someone who's an expert in that, and they can look at your material and say, hey, which learning outcome is this connected to? Or is this the best way for you to evaluate this? Do you have the right distribution? Are you actually going to be able to, distinguish between people who aren't understanding it or putting time in and those who are really making an effort? Are you really going to be able to do that? And I think the folks in your shop are really good at helping bring that sort of critical eye to those pieces and seeing how they weave together. So taking the time to take advantage of the resources that CATL has to offer is I did that and I found it immensely helpful. And just, I'm a great fan of not reinventing the wheel. There's good stuff on the internet. That's where I got my Socratic seminar idea, and then I did it the way it works in my course. I reinvented it for myself. But there's no need to go and just start tabula rasa. There's lots of great resources out there for this exact purpose, and I would encourage people to take advantage of them.
Thank you. I've known you for a few years now, and this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to you about your teaching. So I would love to be what I've heard. I'd love to be a student in your class myself. Now, and I also know you're an award-winning teacher. Is there any other advice that you would like to give to new faculty or even veteran faculty that would like to improve their practice?
I would say take your teaching as seriously and importantly as you do your research. It's not that thing to be done in the evenings or the weekends. It's just as important, and the more you put into it, the more you will get out of it. There's different technologies and platforms that come along, and on the one hand they can seem kind of daunting, on the other hand they can seem like a quick fix to I can do things online, but those are just tools, and how you use them is what's really critical, and none of that is effective unless you have a good foundation of your pedagogical principles and putting the time into course design, both in terms of the structure of the course, but the content of it. And I just really encourage people to spend the time and find the resources available so they can be the best teacher that they can.